This is Father Bonaventure Chapman.
And this is Father Gregory Pine.
Welcome to Godsplaining. Thanks to all those who support us. If you enjoy the show, please consider making a monthly donation on Patreon. Be sure to like, subscribe to Godsplaining wherever you listen to your podcasts. Here we go. This episode of Godsplaining, I am joined by Father Gregory Pine. This is not the first time he's been on this show. Father Gregory, we're glad to have you back. How are you doing?
I'm doing well, thanks. Ooh, I didn't ask you before the episode, but I'm just going to presume permission that I think this will be the first episode of Godsplaining since the Prudence book is available for purchase. So I'm going to take this as an opportunity to mention it. Wait a second. Here it is on hand. For those of you watching at home on YouTube, Father Bonaventure is a handy prop. Bingo!
The cover, they got the letters backwards. But other than that, but I mean, if you read it, it's like it's Hebrew kind of thing. But it's
nice, yeah. You just go right
no,
to
I
left
think that's
and left
some
to
sort
right.
of camera business. Who knows? But it's yeah, it's the same thing. But here it is. So I should say, so I'm gonna be compassed about. So here's Father Gregory on my one side, and here's the book on the other side, and they're both by Father Gregory. So Father Gregory, yes. So congratulations, Father Gregory has just released a book. Here is the copy of it. It says it's called Derp. It's called Prudence, Choose Confidently, Live Boldly, and it's by Father Gregory Pine. It's a delightful little text. But so you want to say anything about this book? This episode is not on this book, but
yeah.
it might turn into that. We'll see.
So for those of you listening and not watching, part of the source of your confusion is that when we record things on camera, everything is reversed like in a mirror. And so that is the source of the aforementioned jokes regarding this here book. But yeah, Prudence. Choose confidently, live boldly. Father Bonaventure has a copy. I don't yet because I live in Switzerland and the Swiss post takes like 1,000 years to get anything anywhere for reasons that completely bewilder me. But
you should read it when you get it.
I should read it. No, that'd be a great idea. So yeah, it's about making decisions and doing so in a way that leads to happiness. That is a thumbnail sketch. But I think a lot of people, when they approach decisions, they're like, this is really terrible. Like it's a source of anxiety or anguish. So will this make your decision-making process simple? Maybe a little bit more. But certainly it'll help you to think about that with just kind of a greater cognizance of the sacred scriptures and the church's tradition and how we can use those resources and riches to live our lives well. So that's my plug. How are you?
I'm doing well. Yeah, I'm just going to talk about the book a little more. Every question that you have about life, that you're looking for answers in there, especially practical questions like what should I do, where should I go, who should I marry, what should I eat, what should I wear, they're all answered in that book. It's not even long. You could carry it around with you when someone says, hey, do you want to go to this movie? You just take out the book, read the book, this sort of thing. So if you want to succeed, by just reading from a text, this is it. You might find that someone might say, that's not living prudently. And you might say, let me check the book. But there it is. So I'm doing well. I have not published a book, but I'm happy to hawk these wares of this book. And I mean, usually we talk about weather or something, but this was the book seems like a good opening for this. So let's just jump in. We haven't talked about we haven't done one of these episodes in a while. As you know, dear listeners, Father Gregory and I usually do some sort of we do literature episodes and movie episodes, and I don't think we've done a movie episode in a while. But do you remember what the last directors? Did we do Villeneuve? We didn't do Villeneuve, did we?
No, I think the last one we did was either Wes Anderson or Christopher Nolan. Maybe Terrence Malick. I think we've done those three. I don't know if we've done any others.
I think it was Terrence Malick. Yeah.
Okay.
I think it was anyway. None of it matters. But we thought we'd talk about another one of our favorite directors. Our favorite director. Yeah. Plural. The Coen Brothers, who some of you probably have seen, and Father Gregory and I have seen a number of movies. They've got just tons of these things. And they're broken out in different ways. And we're going to talk about some themes in the movies, but just to start, there are just some brilliant, quirky aspects. I mean, the Coen Brothers, they're kind of like David Lynch, but less Lynchian. Like it's just cool and interesting enough, but not totally crazy kind of stuff. Yeah. So, Father Gregory, what was the first Coen Brothers movie you saw, and what is is there any quintessential kind of Coenisms that stick to your mind?
I think actually, Father Bonaventure, before I entered the novitiate, I don't know that I really had a taste for film or cinema in the more refined sense of the term. I mostly went for what you term punchy kickies. And then I entered the novitiate, and you're like, what if we watch this weird movie? And I was like, as far as I can tell, I am along for the ride, but I will be there and I will pop the popcorn. So I think I may have seen my first Coen Brothers movie in the novitiate. But since
Wow.
then, I have become personally invested in the Coen Brothers movies and their broad ranging career. I think it begins 1984. They made a movie called Blood Simple. And the most famous actress who appears in that movie is Frances McDormand, who I think Joel Coen ended up marrying. And she reappears in another 4 or 5 or 6 of their
Hmm.
films. They have a thing with certain actors and actresses that they just keep them
Yeah.
around. And then the most recent one went straight to Netflix, I think, The Ballad of Buster Scruggs, which
Hmm.
is a compilation of like, it's got to be what, 5 or 6 short stories or kind of short vignettes. But along the way, they dip into a variety of genres. Sometimes they're writing the screenplay, sometimes they're adapting a novel. They might be doing dark comedy, they might be doing whatever, nihilistic death text, they might be doing something more frivolous, they might be doing something more creative. But they're very, very diverse, and they're very, very, what would you say? They're very, very capable of making movies with with plots, with characters, with themes, which can engage you in a variety of ways. So for this reason, I have become a convert, and I thank you for having testified.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, I'll take credit for that and the book maybe. And just letting you know, there's a book called Prudence out if you want to look into that. Okay. Um, I think people are probably most familiar. Well, I wonder if their most popular one is No Country for Old Men, which is based. And I'd forgotten that was by the Coens for some reason. It's like you forget that Shawshank Redemption it was written by Stephen King. Just, you know, right, there you go. Boom, mysteries revealed. But No Country for Old Men, obviously based off the book of Cormac McCarthy. That might be the most familiar one. But then there's also a trilogy that people might have you might not have known this was a trilogy, but we'll talk about that. Oh Brother Where Art Thou, A Serious Man, and True Grit. And then there's a bunch of kind of one-off comedies, you could say. Lady Killers with the Tom Hanks is in that. Burn After Reading, Hudsucker Proxy, bizarre names. And Father Gregory has seen all of these because he doesn't do anything to half measure. He's a prudent man, so he has seen all of these and taken notes. And then I'm sure. Um, but let's do some themes here. Some themes
Yep.
here. So the first theme we could say is there's something. What do you want to say? Something. It's dark comedy is a good word for it, but there's something comedic and kind of you're laughing at things that you probably oughtn't to be laughing at,
Mm.
but they do it in a way that's helpful. So, what are some of the? I mean, what is this dark comedy business of the Coen Brothers?
Yeah, I think so. Maybe people are familiar with the films of Quentin Tarantino, um,
Hmm.
and the most recent which is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And Tarantino is kind of known for a certain crassness. It's what would you say? It's a kind of lack of respect almost for the human condition, or it's a kind of violent tendency to mistreat the human condition. So you find yourself sometimes in a position where you're laughing as someone is beaten or murdered or whatever it might be, or you're supposed to do that. Those with more sensitive consciences are typically horrified and then take private vows never to watch another Quentin Tarantino movie. Um, but there's a little bit of that that's going on in the Coen brothers, but the way that they do it is a little less irreverent. And what you attribute that to, hard to say. I think they are kind of Jewish by origin, but I don't get the impression that they are of like a kind of practicing disposition. But they have a kind of respect for the human condition, and yet they're willing to mock it in a pretty thoroughgoing way. And so, with a lot of these dark comedies, you find yourself just kind of marveling at the agony and the ecstasy, the heights and the depths, the exalted things that people are capable of, and the kind of, what would you say, base or pathetic things that we stoop to at times. And they can just make this into a whole story and just kind of spin a story out on the basis of the fact that we, as rational animals, have this spiritual dimension and then this corporeal dimension, which often serve ironically to, I don't know what you would say, highlight the heights and the depths of both. So yeah, I don't know. What do you see there?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a bit like I was thinking about this, kind of like Flannery O'Connor. There's something, but in a jokey mood. It's like Flannery O'Connor if she had like a night show or something, you know, because she really puts it out there, and it's real dark, for a purpose. And they have a sort of darkness to some of the things, but it never gets too in your face or drenchy. It's not lugubrious or, yeah. I mean, just I think of like thick blackness. It's never that. Like, for instance, Christopher Nolan sometimes, like Dark Knight, for instance. If you compared maybe Dark Knight to, say, let's give an example of like No Country for Old Men. Um, you have two characters that are very dark. In The Dark Knight, with Christopher Nolan, you have, of course, the Joker played by Heath Ledger. And then in No Country for Old Men, of course, you have Shigur, the kind of the nihilistic joy romper. And so you have two dark characters, but the Batman movie with Christopher Nolan, you're just always in darkness in a way. And there's, and it's not as deep as No Country for Old Men, but with Shigur, there's still a lot of good there, but it's not good in the sense of superhero stuff. It's the tensions of, yeah, maybe there's something kind of right about this guy, but at the same time, there's victory against him. So maybe that's that. There's a lightness. It's like a touching of the most serious issues, but in a manageable way, in a way that some other movies, or like Flannery O'Connor, can be a little bit, can be very hard for some people. So yeah, it's sort of a light brush, pastel kind of darkness, I would say. The black that you get in kind of a Franz Klein painting, maybe that kind of thing.
When so, I mean, you have these dark comedies, and then you have these other movies which are more just like darkadies, dark
Hmm.
tragedies, dark. What would you call them? Hard to say. Nihilistic death tech, maybe that's the best word for it. Um, and I think the most famous of one is, like you said, No Country for Old Men. But then there are others like Inside Llewyn Davis, and even some of the different sketches in the Ballad of Buster Scruggs tend to be this way. But I think that part of the reason for which I find them engaging, or I find them even humanizing, is because they show like a kind of sensitivity to the human condition. And what we find in a lot of film or a lot of movies is that there's a falsification of the the human condition as a way by which to sell. So you're very conscious of the fact, or at least you surrender yourself to the fact that this is a commercial enterprise. I am paying money to be entertained, to receive this in an almost wholly passive way, and just to see the things explode, or to see the couple reunited, or to have some maudlin or otherwise saccharine encounter, which will make me feel a little less terrible about my life. But I'm not going to have to do any work, right? Or I'm not going to have to do any serious leisure. Whereas there's something about the Coen Brothers movies which kind of appeal to you as a thinking human subject.
Hmm.
They're like, but what about this thing? Or but what about that thing? And one of the I don't know, one of the aspects of these more difficult movies, or these nihilistic death texts, that I find to be especially delightful is that they show you how very stark or how very difficult the human condition is, but they also affirm something at the heart of that human condition. And you probably have your different examples of this. I have my own. I have two that come to mind right now.
Hmm.
But one is Inside Llewyn Davis. It's a kind of, yeah, there's this guy. He's living in the late 60s in Greenwich Village during the, what would you say? It's a kind of like musical revival that's taking place at that point. But he misses out on it, although he's got talent, he's got skill. He's just kind of in the wrong time. He's at the wrong place at the wrong time, or in the wrong place at the wrong time. I'll learn how to speak eventually. It's just not today.
Hmm.
Um, and you see them kind of sketching out the eternal recurrence of the same as a way of showing the futility of his efforts. He repeats the same day, he repeats the same activity. But in the course of the repeated day, they transpose small elements, one in particular, which show that the door is open, or that the door remains open to small changes. And I think that that's really sensitive to the fact that if you watch a movie that says, like, you can be anything you want to be, just try harder, what that does to us as humans is it kind of elates us for 5 seconds, and then we realize that we're suffering in the midst of the same human condition. And actually there's nothing about that appeal which is really animating. All right. Whereas when somebody says, I affirm the difficulty of your situation, but I also see this thing here, which affords us an entry into something beyond, you're like, I think I might actually believe that, because I feel like this artist has suffered the things that I have suffered and seen a way through them, or I kind of like painted or portrayed a way through them. And that I find to be very humanizing, because it doesn't treat the human condition as something just to be kind of like drum beaten and then sent in whatever other direction that the current market dictates, but like something to be suffered with, and then something to be kind of conducted onwards in a real sensitive way.
Yeah, and I think my example, I suppose, of this kind of real human things, but with a certain touch to them, is from this movie Hail Caesar, which I saw recently, and it's growing on me. I didn't initially. I think I initially did not like it, but I have to say there's some the characters in there. So it's Josh Brolin is Mannix, Ed Mannix, who's in charge of a studio, Hollywood studio, and he's just trying to. He's got to put out tons of fires. And George Clooney's character, I forget, he's been kidnapped by some Marxists, and he's so it's the 50s, and it's kind of there's something beautiful, but it's you have both the seriousness, because the subline of the thing is Mannix is trying to put out all these fires in this Hollywood thing because he thinks that it's good what Hollywood is doing, producing movies. This is particularly about the Christ. This movie Hail Caesar is about George Clooney's playing this Roman tribune who's going to be converted by Christ. And so he thinks this is really important, and he has these kind of conversations with a priest confessor. It takes place over an entire day, and he's gone to confession twice, and so he's really getting in there. Um, and and then so he has to decide, like, he's offered a job opportunity to another place that would be more commercialistic, make more money, all these things, and it's a question of, is it worth putting up with nonsense for a good purpose, and his resolve to do that. And so at the same point, you have this strong moral lesson about the moral compass and the importance of transcendence in Christ. And then the other point, at the other hand, at the end of it, of course, George Clooney's character is delivering this amazing, conversion to Christ, and everyone's like about to go to tears, and he forgets like his key line, the key word in it, and so everyone just like has to stop, and you're back to the normal, like, good one, we almost made that. Let's try it again. And I love that kind of aspect because it's so human. I think humanizing is your right word, is taking the important lessons of the world and of life, but also presenting them with the chiaroscuro, the kind of the darker side, the human side, that we are both committed to the most important things in life, and we also totally forget what's important and do stupid things, and that these need to be that these are together, and we're working towards something more perfect. And he presents that in a way that is comfortable, and yet at the same time challenges you to say, no, there are really serious things here, but life also, it can be taken a little bit less seriously. It's good to laugh at ourselves as well.
Yeah, I think that this dynamic comes to its perfection in No Country for Old Men. And what I am about to say is just lifted directly from the musings of Father Gabriel Toretta, who has watched this movie a few times and has excellent things to say about it. But without giving too much away, like you said, it's based off a novel by Cormac McCarthy. In this novel and in the movie, the antagonist, Anton Chigurh, he delivers people's death sentence in pretty terrifying terms, but he often has them flip a coin. Heads, I kill you; tails, you walk. Inevitably, he kills everyone whom he meets in the movie, or everyone who witnesses a crime or a killing. So, like, all those who are in any way implicated with his professional life suffer the consequences. And this comes to a head in the last scene, where it's a matter of tying up the last loose end. And he offers this individual a choice to flip the coin. But rather than flip the coin, which she does in the book, she refuses to flip the coin, which is really fascinating, because here is this terrible, terrible murderer who has overpowered every single one of his victims, who has never been, directed from his murderous course. And this woman just says no. And that is an affirmation of her freedom, even in the midst of this choice that he poses to her, which would kind of run roughshod over her freedom, as if to say, like, whether you live or die, it's a matter of chance. And she says, no, it's not a matter of chance, because I choose not to flip, because you've chosen to kill me. And it's after that, this is a debatable interpretation of the movie, that his life kind of comes apart. So whereas he had been meticulous up to that point, he commits a fatal error, and the movie kind of ends on that note for him. So yeah, does it end terribly for most people who ever cross paths with this guy? Absolutely. But the fact that somebody was willing to affirm their human dignity and their human freedom, even in this very, very thin way, proves to him an occasion of some kind of conversion, not the conversion that we typically talk about, like grace rushed into his life, he saw the light and came to the Lord, but in the sense that what he had settled upon as a working model for his life was destabilized because he saw, in the face of another who wouldn't affirm it or who wouldn't abide by his terms, that it had to be reevaluated in some way, that there was something lacking to it, which I just think is, like the whole movie kind of sets that up. And I feel like it just really captures it well.
Yeah, that's true. It is. It's a spectacular movie, and it is very different. The book's good. The book is, in some ways, the sheriff in the book, I think, is better, although Tommy Lee Jones does a great job. But in other ways, the movie takes an angle on it that is profound, because these guys, I don't know what their education is, but they strike me as being very intelligent about what they're doing. Particularly, we'll now mention the trilogy, which people may not have known was a trilogy, but it's kind of a Western Civ thing. So if you were taught Western civilizations, for instance, you know that there are kind of three big cultures, well, used to be. No, there's a lot more apparently. But Greek, you learn the Greeks, then you learn the Jews. So you had reason and revelation, and they were combined in Christianity. So you had the Greeks, the Jews, and Christianity. And the Greeks had epics. So you have epics, the Iliad, the Odyssey, and you'd read these things. And the Jews, of course, have the Old Testament, and Christianity has the scriptures and going forward. So the Coen brothers actually produced a Western civilization trilogy. I don't know if they were trying to get into, the homeschooling market or the Catholic liberal education market, but really well done. So, Oh Brother, Where Art Thou is what it's called, is the Greek epic, and it's based off the Odyssey. A Serious Man, which is probably the least well known of the three, is based on the Book of Job, and then it's a Jewish community a Jewish family in America in the 50s, and then True Grit is the Christian epic, and it's based off of particularly the Calvinist version of Christianity. And what's fascinating about these movies, although individually spectacular as well, is what they're doing in them is, I would say, Hans-Jürgen Gadamer, German philosopher in the 20th century, student of Heidegger, lived for 1,000 years, called it a fusion of horizons, that when we interpret a text, we always bring something to it and it brings something to us, and we fuse those two horizons, our horizon and the text's horizon, you could say, its setting. And these three movies are spectacular in the sense that they fuse the horizons of where they set the movies in with these original texts. So, Our Brother, Where Art Thou is set in, it's in the South, and it's and the Serious Man is Job set in the 50s, and then True Grit, of course, is the remaking of John Wayne's famous classic. But they're set in particular context, but not in a silly way, but in an integrated way. So what's your favorite of those? What do you take of those three, and what's your favorite element of them, would you say?
Yeah, maybe just treat them in order. Send it back to you after a short thought on O Brother, Where Art Thou. But
that's great.
Part of the reason for which I love O Brother, Where Art Thou is that it shows the kind of diffusiveness of culture. So like you said, it's set in the South, and it commends the South with a kind of charm. Even when it's showing you a KKK rally, it does so, what would you say? It does so with like a kind of musical flair. But the Coen brothers are said to never have read the Odyssey. Okay, so the way in which they get their data for portraying this epic is just kind of by cultural word of mouth. So they're appropriated images. They're kind of showing you the diffusiveness of culture, and they're showing how they themselves stand at the confluence of cultures. They're American. They're part of this great tradition. They're Jews, so they have a particular, like light to shine on the matter, and they do it, and they carry it off well. You often find this with, when Shakespeare is reinterpreted in light of some contemporary event. It's like you go to see Coriolanus, and it's almost always done as 20th century fascism. That can bring things out of the text that you wouldn't have recognized except that they were transposed in some way. And I think that that's one of the proper vocations of an artist, is just to transpose reality according to the kind of insight of his vision. And they do that. And part of what testifies to the fact that they accomplished that in No Brother, Where Art Thou is that it's kind of in part responsible for the bluegrass revival in the United States at the beginning of the 21st century. So when we think about our own lives, like what do people know about the Dominican province of St. Joseph? Well, a lot of people know the hillbilly Thomists, okay? And a lot of these guys are influenced by music that they are hearing, which really comes back online with "Oh Brother, Where Art Thou?"
Mm-hmm.
Because the Coen brothers have sensibilities about the Odyssey and about American bluegrass or just Americana music more broadly, setting in the South and just putting it in a kind of, hilarious dark comedy type way. And they make something beautiful, which gives us a deepened appreciation as to our own human state, and a deepened appreciation as to our own pilgrimage. So I think that as just a work of cultural art is quite an accomplishment, and it doesn't end up being heavy. You
Mm-hmm.
enjoy it, as art is meant to make something beautiful and beauty is meant to please.
Yeah.
So they pull it off. But yeah,
And
what do you
then,
think?
well, I think so. I'll switch over to A Serious Man, because I'd like that they make it. It's not heavy; they make it enjoyable. Because if there any book in the Old Testament you could make super heavy, is Job. The suffering of Job with all the scrapings off of the skin, and all this sort of thing, and everything in Job, and they make it light, but still tell a good account of it. So in this Serious Man, it's the a Jewish father, and they're both Jewish, so they have inside knowledge and this sort of thing. Grew up in the 50s, and he's a physics professor, but his wife is trying to leave him with this other man in the Jewish community, and his son is going through his like bar mitzvah or something. No, it's he's going through the ritual to becoming a man, and he has to visit these four rabbis. You're visiting, and so because this man is the professor who's the center of it, the father. He's having struggles with the family. He's being persecuted in all these sorts of different ways, and he's trying to figure out the meaning of life and what's going on. And so he goes to these different rabbis, just like Job has to go to these different people, and they're all comical. And there's the young man, the old man, and you get these different kind of answers or to what's going on in his life. But he's still got to figure out where God is in this thing. And we won't give away the ending, but it's a spectacular situation of Job and the persecution of a man for he's done nothing wrong as far as you can tell, but everything's just kind of collapsing around him and his family situation and such. And he's trying to find to be a serious man, a righteous man, is the kind of the phrase there. Um, in the midst of all these other things, and it's absolutely so it gets the sufferings of, well, where were you? It has the storm cloud literally at the end, but does it in a way that just does not feel at all saccharine or preachy or anything, but very very real. The final turn, and we'll both do this one, I suppose, is True Grit, which I love. John Wayne's True Grit. It's just phenomenal. And the Coen brothers decide that they're going to take that, and it's hard to compare which ones. I mean, they're just such different movies, because True Grit is the movie that John Wayne finally won the Oscar for and rides off into the sunset in. And there's no riding off into the sunset in this one. This is Jeff Bridges plays this one, and he's plays in some of their other movies as well. But Rooster Cogburn, the sheriff. If you haven't seen this, it's a dark movie about vengeance, and the central character Maddie has a very different. She is not the sweet girl, kind of sweet, strong-willed girl from the original one, but rather is deeply affected by a Calvinist kind of black and white justice thing. It's predestined that her father's killer will meet his death, and nothing is going to stop from this. So it's a beautiful. But where is Christ in that? This is the interesting part I want to throw to Father Gregory is this is their Christian epic. So the Odyssey and Job, I think, are pretty good. This one is it's hard to recognize this as, I would say, a Christian epic, other than perhaps you could say Rooster Cogburn is this kind of savior figure who protects and guides her. But that's the most Vegas. But what do you make of the Christian aspects of this from the Catholic perspective? I get it from the Calvinist perspective, but from the
Yeah.
Catholic perspective, what do you think?
I think I think it's a Jewish take on Christian life, and I think the three movies represent a Jewish take on, on a variety of things. But
Mm-hmm.
one way in which to organize it is the inexplicability or the explicability of things. So I'm thinking of Nietzsche's Birth of Tragedy, and he describes this notion where at the heart of Greek culture, there's a kind of struggle between what he calls the Apollonian and then the Dionysian. So the Apollonian would be like the more rational, the more explicable. And then the Dionysian would be like the more emotional, the more ecstatic, the more, like fertility and drunkenness and whatever you would call it. So that this is the source of a kind of dynamic tension at the heart of Greek culture. And what you have in O Brother, Where Art Thou is a kind of exploration of that, insofar as you have characters who weigh in on both sides of the matter, and it's largely a story of their conflicts or of their evasions. And then with A Serious Man, you have the Jewish interpretation of the explicability and inexplicability of life, which is a kind of narrative interpretation. So it's, if you ask a yes or no question to a Jewish rabbi, he tells you a story, because there's this deep, deep appreciation for the narrative quality of human life. And that we kind of come to a sense of who we are within the context of a father's house, a tribe, a clan, a salvation history, but it doesn't necessarily have the kind of termination which one might expect of a 20th or a 21st century Hollywood film, because the Jews are used to, endless oppression, endless suffering, and the awaiting of a Messiah. So they're kind of an open inexplicability. Whereas I think what they're saying with the third movie is that Christianity is tempted to be a kind of closed explicability, in the sense that because, the Savior has in fact come, Christianity can sometimes be somewhat triumphalistic in its stance vis-a-vis other religions, which is to say, like, we have all the answers, and as a result of which we don't need to ask further questions. And I think that Maddie really embodies that. She has a very clear-cut narrative for her life, and she goes about prosecuting that narrative. And Rooster Cogburn kind of breaks into her world and shakes it up. And you see that there's almost a movement of her heart kind of in response, a generous movement, a receptive movement. But she eventually, cuts it off just as, her arm is cut off. And that for her is the final closure of what is a closed explicability. So I think for us, as Christians, it's a kind of challenge to recover something of, the Dionysian, not in the sense of bacchanalian revels, but like to recover the wholeness of our humanity, to cover a certain sense of the inexplicability of life, and oppose that to the Lord, rather than treating the Lord as if, he kind of closes or forecloses on, subsequent human reflection.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to end on. So, folks, thanks again to all our supporters. If you'd like to give to or donate to our work, then check us out at patreon.com/Godsplaining. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Like, subscribe, leave 5-star reviews, what have you. Visit godsplaining.org, godsplaining.org. I mean, no one types in these full things, it just autofills. To shop our merchandise and get dates and information for upcoming Godsplaining events, particularly the retreats coming up in July and August this summer. We'd love to see you for there. Also, any sort of other books that Father Gregory is publishing will be on Godsplaining there, I suspect, too. So with that, we'll say a blessed time for you. We'll be praying for you. Please pray for us, and thanks for all your support and your listening to us, and God bless.